Sorry, we're late.
No,
Good evening.
a lot of stuff.
Got a lot of Torah to learn tonight. So we're starting on the very bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. We'll be learning Lamed Beis, which is that's a real Amud of Gemara right there. Lamed Beis. We'll also be learning all of Lamed Gimel. So we have a lot of ground to cover. It is relatively quick. A lot of psukim, a lot of basic ideas about Rosh Hashana, Malchiyos, Zichronos, and Shofros. Which psukim do we do? Why do we do these psukim? The numbers. We're going to get into some of the halachos of the tkiyos. How long is a tkiyah? Our Makri is not here tonight, David Merzel, but he's the one who knows how long that a tkiyah needs to be. It's based on tonight's daf. So let's get started, and we're going to move pretty quickly, Mirz Hashem, to try and get there to make it in time for Mariv, and hopefully with some time to spare. Bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, the last mission on the page, 2 lines from the bottom in Mazkirin. We do not say Zichron, Malchus, V'Shofar, Shel Puranus. The psukim that we say for Zichronos, Malchios, and Shofros cannot be psukim that are to the negative of bad psukim. We'll see what that means in the Gemara. And we should also know that when we start the psukim, Maschil b'Torah, Umashlim b'Navi, that we should start with the psukim from Chumash and then move on to Navi, and that's the appropriate flow. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Im Hishlim b'Torah, if in fact you concluded with Torah, then Yatza. But what does that mean? We'll have to see in the Gemara. That brings us to the top of Lamed Beis Amud Beis. At the very top line, says the Gemara Malchios. What's an example of a pasuk in Malchios where Melech is referred to, but the pasuk is negative? That's the Puranios that our Mishnah spoke about. We had said in our Mishnah that negative psukim can't be used. So what's the negative pasuk by Malchios? Kigon Chai Ani Neum Hashem Elokim Im Lo Biyar Chazak V'Zornatu Uvechem Ashfucha Em Lo Chalem. With poured out anger, I will rule over them. That's an example of a pasuk that we should not use. And then based on this pasuk, the Gemara says, even though Rav Nachman said, Kol ki hai rischa, yeah, Kadosh Baruch Hu is very upset at us, but let him be angry. Lirtach kutchabrichu, let him be upset at us, on us, v'lifro kinan, and let him then redeem us. Get the anger out, have the fight, and then repair your relationship. Just let him be angry at us. So let him say, let's say the pasuk. What's the big deal? Kevan de berischa, or says the Gemara. No, since the pasuk was said in anger, ad kure rischa, mentioning the anger bereish shata in the beginning of the year, lo mad karinan, that we do not do. We do not mention negative psukim at the beginning of the year, and that really is the yesod of this part of our Mishnah. That the Mishnah had said when we say Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, we don't say psukim that have any negative connotations. What would be an example of the first of the middle width lines? We're 5 lines down. Lamed Beis, Zikaron. What's an example of a pasuk from Zichronos that has the word Zecher and is negative? Kigon Vayizkor Basar Hema. That pasuk is a negative pasuk. And by Shofar, what's the negative pasuk there? Kigon Tiku Shofar Begiva. That also is a negative story in Tanakh. Have a look. But the point is that these psukim are not allowed to be mentioned in the psukim and Chumah, in the psukim and the Machzor, because they are negative. And then the Gemara says, Aval, second of the middle with lines, 8 lines down, 7 lines down. Aval, in Balomar Malchos Zichron v'Shofar Shel Puranus Shel Ovdei Kochavim Omer. If there's a pasuk that's negative, you're not allowed to say it unless the pasuk had to do with goyim, and then we allow for that to take place because that's still going to be a sign of Kadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus, even though it doesn't sacrifice the quality of the relationship that we have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So, what are some examples of that? A psukim that are negative as it relates to Akum, and because it's only related to Akum, we're allowed to say it in Shemona Esrei Malchus. What's an example of one from the world of Malchios? Says the Gemara, Hashem Malach Yirgezu Amim, a famous pasuk. Uchigon, another pasuk. Hashem Melech Olam Va'ed Avadu Goyim Meretzo. That's another negative pasuk. What about Zichron? What is Zichron? What is a pasuk that has to do with Zichronos that is negative, that only has to do with an akum, and is allowed to be said? Kigon Zechor Hashem Livnei Adom V'chulei. And by Shofar, what pasuk would be allowed to be said here, even though it's negative about Goyim? Kigon Hashem Elokim B'Shofar Yizka V'Halach B'Saros Teiman Uchsiv, and as well Hashem Tzivakos Yagein Aleim. All right, so that's. This is supposed to be an Arshman. This is about an akum. That was the first part of the Gemara, says that the negative things that can't be mentioned are psukim.
That's the only one. Right?
Yeah, we have about Saros Temon as well. I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's the same.
And Hashem Tzivakos Yagein Aleim. Those are not the same psukim. Yeah. Yeah, the last 2 are included, but really they're negative. They're Puranus for Akum, but Puranus for Akum is not a reason for us to not say those psukim. So in summary, up until this point, about 12 lines down, what we've learned so far is that psukim that are negative about Jews cannot be said in the Shemona Esrei Rosh Hashana. Psukim that are negative about non-Jews can be said, as long as they're reflective of Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, and then that would be fine. Then the Gemara adds in a din that says as follows: Ein maskir and zikaron shel yachid v'afilu l'tova. You're not allowed to, in the psukim of Zichronos, you're not allowed to say one person's specific pasuk, even if it's good. Kigon, Zachreni Hashem birtzon amecha, remember me as an individual. Ukigon, Zachra li Elokai l'tova. These psukim are about individuals, and they're not about the tzibur, and they can't be mentioned even though they're good. Good. So it says the Gemara, the word piktonos, hare hayden kizichronos. The usage of the word pikadon or piktonos in Chumash and Tanakh is going to be similar to the rules of zichronos. Kigon ve'Hashem pakad es sarah, uchigon pakod pakati eschem divrei Reb Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer einon kizichronos. I disagree with you that the language of pakod is not the same as the language of zikaron. So we know that we're supposed to have X number of psukim, 10 psukim by Zichronos. Can one of them be Pikadon? Piktonos, this pasuk that we just said, Pakod Pakati, that's a machlokas, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. And this is the first of many machlokas that we're going to see today between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. Let's continue. Well, Rabbi Yossi, even according to Rabbi Yossi, Nihinami de Piktonos. Okay, I understand that you think the Piktonos is the same as Zichronos, but Harehen Kizichronos, I'm sorry, Nihinami de Piktonos, Harehen Kizichronos. Yes, I understand, Rabbi Yossi, that you hold that when a pasuk says Piktonos, that it's the same as Zichronos, but Be'Hashem Pakades Sarah, that pasuk we do say, but the problem is it's Pikadon de Yachidhu. We just said you're not allowed to have a pasuk about the pikadon of a yachid that deals with only one individual. Yet we know that in our machzor we do say v'Hashem pakades sarah. We lay in this. This is all over the place. So it says the Gemara, why is that allowed? And the Gemara answers with a tough answer, but the Gemara says kevan da'asu rabin mina. Since there were a lot of children that were born from her, from Sarah, then it's kirabim. It's kirabim damya. It's similar to the rabbin. What does that mean? If another story in Tanakh, a woman had a lot of children, she didn't even have a lot of children. She had a lot of grandchildren. She had a lot of great-grandchildren, and that's where we come from. So difficult to understand, maybe because it means she's Eim Kol Chai. I don't know, very difficult. The next section of the Gemara measures whether or not this pasuk counts as one or two references of Melech. Let's see. The pasuk says in one pasuk, "Seusha Roshechem Yinasu Pischi Alam V'Yavu Melech HaKavod," a famous pasuk. Miza Melech HaKavod Hashem Yizuz V'Gibor Hashem Gibor Melchama. That pasuk has the word Melech twice. Here's the next pasuk, third of the way down. Sushaim Roshechem Usu Pischi Alam V'Yavu Melech HaKavod. Mihu Za Melech HaKavod Hashem Tzavakos Melech HaKavod Sela. And that second pasuk has a reference to Melech 3 times. And that's what the Gemara says. Rishona Shtayim. The first pasuk has a reference to a king twice. Shniya. The second pasuk is Shalosh. Tivi Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda argues and says no. Rabbi Yehuda Omer 1/3 of the way down, about 10 lines before the very wide lines on Lamed Beis and Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rishona Achas Shniya Shtayim, that he says it's not correct. Really, in the first pasuk when it says Melech, the context of the use of the word Melech is that it's Mihuzeh Melech HaKavod. First I said Melech, and then I said Mihuzeh Melech, and who is that king? So that's not considered 2 usages of the word Melech, it's only considered 1, and that too is a machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, that Rishon Achas and Shniya Shtayim, that the second pasuk only has 2 references to Melech. The next pasuk also, we have to figure out how Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda understand this. Zamrula Elokim Zameru, Zamrula Malkeinu Zameru, Ki Melech Kol Haaretz Elokim. So it says the Gemara Shtayim, Divrei Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says that it says the word Melech twice. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Achas, it only counts as 1 because one Melech is simply referencing the other, and it's not 2 different ones. Vishavan, but they both agree. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda both agree. Everyone agrees that when it says Melech in one case, and the rest of the phraseology is Elokim Yoshav al Kisei Kodsho, which is a king, we don't look at that as a second reference to Melech. We only look at that pasuk as 1. In Zikaron Sheyesh Bo Trua, what happens if you have a pasuk that has 2 references? It has Zikaron and Trua. So we don't know. Should it be mentioned in Zichronos or Shofros? So says the Gemara, what's an example of this? Kigon Shabbason Zikaron Tura Mikra Kodesh. It has Zecher and it has Trua. So then the Tanakama writes, Rabbi Yossi writes, Omra im haZichronos ve'Omra im haShofros. Rabbi Yossi can be read in either place. These are tougher questions, like what happens if the pasuk has double references? That's good. So that's here. Rabbi Yossi is more flexible. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eina Omra Ella Im zichronos bilvad. It can only be read with zichronos and not with shofros. What about a pasuk that has malchus sheyeshimo trua? What about a pasuk that would seemingly fit in malchios and also seemingly fit in shofros because it speaks about trua? So there the Gemara says, Kigon, what's an example? Hashem elokavi mosras melech bo. We have trua and melech. So there the Tanakama Rabbi Yossi says, Omra im hamalchios wa Omra im hashofros. It can be said either way. Divi Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, first of the very long lines on Lamed Beis and Mud Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Eino Omra. No, it can only be said with malchios. What about trua she'eni maloklu? A pasuk that speaks about shofar, but that doesn't have any other references at all. It doesn't speak about malchios or zichronos at all. So there it says the Gemara, what's an example of that? Kigon yom tura yelachem. So the Tanakama says Omrim shofros di Rabbi Yossi. That's obvious. The pasuk speaks about shofros, included in shofros. However, Rabbi Yehuda says Omer eina omra kol ikar. You're not allowed to use that pasuk at all. It cannot be even mentioned in. It has to have more context than just that. That brings us to the 2 dots, almost 2/3 of the way down on Lamed Beis and Beis. Let's continue. We said in our Mishnah, the Masl b'Torah Mashlim b'Navi, that we said that the Tanakama was of the opinion that you have to start the psukim in Torah and you have to end with psukim from Navi. Rabbi Yossi Omer im hishlim b'Torah yatsa, and that was the end of the quote of our Mishnah. That Rabbi Yossi said that if in fact you concluded your psukim with Torah, then you'd still be Yotze. So this is not such a simple piece of Mishnah because the Gemara says im hishlim. The language of Rabbi Yossi was that if you complete your psukim in Malchia, Zichronos, or Shofros with Torah, im hishlim, it implies diavad im lechatchila lo. That's only true b'diavad, but not true lechatchila. Ay v'hatanya, how can that be? Rabbi Yossi Omer hamashlim b'Torah harezim meshubach. We see that there's a shita that you are allowed to conclude with psukim and chumash. So therefore, that should be against our Mishnah. Our Mishnah implied that it was only b'diavad, but this brisa seems to say that it's even lechatchila. So says the Gemara, you're right. Maybe we should change our Mishnah to say ema. It should say mashlim. It should say not that im mashlim or im hishlim, then you're yotze, but mashlim, that you taka should finish with psukim from the Torah. So says the Gemara, im hishlim katani. Okay, your answers have to fit with the words, but the Mishnah says im hishlim. You can't just throw the word out, and therefore we're left with our initial diuk because it says im hishlim katani. Therefore diavadim lechatchila lo, 4 lines into the wide lines. So then the Gemara says, you're right. My answer was a bad answer, and I'm going to give you a better one. Hachi ka'amar. This is the proper way to understand our Mishnah. Maschil b'Torah umashlim b'Navi. The Tanakama says that you start with psukim from chumash and you end with Navi. Rabbi Yossi Omer mashlim b'Torah, that you should be mashlim with Torah. That is the ideal. And v'im hishlim b'Navi yatsa. And that's why you will note that at the end of the section of, for example, of Malchios, we go back and say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's to fulfill this sheet in the Gemara. So we have psukim from Tanakh and psukim from all over the place, but we come back at the end of each section to close with a pasuk from Chumash because of this sheet of Rabbi Yossi that he says Mashlim Torah. If you accidentally skip that pasuk, then you'll be Yotze, but that's not the ideal. And a brisa to support 5 lines into the very wide lines, Lamed Beis Mid Beis, the brisa says Tanya Nami Hachi Amar Belazar Rabbi Yossi Vasikin, the big tzaddikim Hayu Mashlimin Osaba Torah. That's how they used to do it. That's how the righteous people used to do it. This Vasikin doesn't mean they daven Vasikin. That's just how we translate the word Vasikin. Vasikin, it doesn't mean that at all. Vasikin just means the elders. It means the ones who are the really righteous people. The word Vatik means old or ancient. So says the Gemara, when I look through Chumash, there are ample psukim to fill the quotas in regards to Zichronos and Shofros. Ikatuva. Ela Malchios, Tlasu Dehavian. There's only 3 psukim in Chumash that actually speak about Malchus. Hashem Elokavi Mos Ruas Melech Bo. That's number 1. Number 2, Vahi B'Shur Melech. And number 3, Hashem Yimloch Le'olam Voed. Because as we spoke about, not all psukim work. You can't have psukim that are perennios. You can't have psukim that speak about individuals. And we got to make sure that they all make sense. And we're still missing one. We need 10 psukim in total, and we won't have 10. We need 4 from Chumash, 3 from Nevi'im, and 3 from Ksuvim. So what do we do? So that's also a machlokes. So Amar Reb Shimon, Amar Reb Huna, the way I can get you to the right number of psukim is Tashma. We have a pasuk, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And even though the pasuk doesn't say the word Melech, but the whole undertone of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Melech. Malchus. Rabbi Yossi says that pasuk counts as one of the ones from Malchios, which is the example that I just gave. Is that's the capstone on the whole section there of Malchios. Is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eina Malchus. That's not considered a Malchus reference in the pasuk, and therefore it cannot be used. The next pasuk that's not a possibility. to be used for Malchus, because there really aren't too many psukim that speak about Melech. So there too, on that pasuk, even though it doesn't say Hashem's name, but it says Ki Hashem hu Elokim Einod, maybe we should assume Malchus. Rabbi Yosef, Yehuda says no. Omer Eina Malchus. This pasuk doesn't count either for our count of 10, because the pasuk doesn't say Melech. Last example before the Mishnah, last line before the Mishnah, 3/4 of the way down, Lamed Beis Mid Beis. Famous pasuk. So maybe Einod Milvado. Obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Melech. So maybe we should say that this pasuk is considered to be Malchus, and that would be the Shita of Divrei Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Malchus. So from the conclusion of the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi has a couple of options to get to our 10th pasuk, but it doesn't seem to be the case that Rabbi Yehuda has a real solution. That brings us to a new Mishnah. Over Lifnei Hateva B'Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashana Hasheni Maskia. When a person goes to daven for the tzibur on Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashana, if he's the Baal Shachris, he is not the one who is Tokea. Hasheni Maskia. The second person who does the davening, the Baal Musaf, then the tkiyos are done at that time. We'll see why in a moment. Uvishasa Hallel. Whenever there is a time that we say Hallel, of course, Rosh Hashanah is not one of those times. We'll see why in tonight's Gemara. That's why we don't say Hallel. But when one does say Hallel, Harishon Mikras Hallel, that's always going to be read in conjunction with the Baal Shachar, which is why we have our minhag to say Hallel immediately after Shmona Esrei, after Chazaras Hashatz. So to review, our Mishnah says that we do Tkiyas Shofar by Musaf, but when it comes to Hallel, we do it by Shachris, and that's going to be the thrust of this brief Gemara. My Shna Sheni Maskia. Why is it that we have the Baal Tokea by the Baal Musaf? Why don't we have him do it by Shachris? Says the Gemara, Mishum de Berovam Hadras Melech. I guess it's not only in modern times that people showed up late. The Gemara says Berovam Hadras Melech. There's more people at Shul by Musaf than there is at Shachris, even on Rosh Hashanah. Who would have thought? I thought that was a modern occurrence, but no. The Gemara says Mishum de Ravam Hadras Melech. Says the Gemara, that's great, that's cute, ihachi. But if it's true, then Hallel Nami B'Sheni. We should also say that Hallel said closer to Musaf Mishum de Ravam Hadras Melech. Can't use the argument in only one direction. If you're saying Baravam Hadras Melech applies to Tkiyah Shofar, it should apply to Hallel as well. Says the Gemara, L'mayshna Hallel de Berishon. Why is it that Hallel should be read earlier? Why is it read with the Baal Shachris? Mishum, there's a reason Makdim in the mitzvahs. Because when we do the mitzvah of Hallel, there's a mitzvah involved, and therefore you should do it earlier. Says the Gemara, I mean, at most, Hallel is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, right? It's probably just a minhag. But Tkiyah, nami ne'avid b'rishon, mishum, there's reason makdim in the mitzvahs. That's a din d'oraisa. Of course, you should do it in the morning. Maybe we should do it before Shachris. Forget about waiting till Musaf. That's the lazy man's job. Why do we, and it's like the centerpiece of our davening, like why do we wait right before Musaf to do the Tkiyah? If you're saying it's reason makdim in the mitzvah applies to Hallel, and that's why that whenever we have Hallel, it's always said by Shachris. So say it's reason makdim in the mitzvah by Tkiyah Shofar as well. Says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan b'shas gzeras hamalchus shanu. Wow, this was terrible. There's Gzeras HaMalchus. Some of the Rishonim point out, Tosfos points this out, that people were killed when they would blow shofar right when they got to Shul, because it was like a call to arms, or so it was perceived by the environments in which we lived during those particular times. And therefore, they pushed it off to later in davening, so they would see, no, the Jews are just praying. It's not a call to arms. They're just sitting there praying. They're doing their shuckling, and that all is well. And on Sukkot, they've got their fern branches. Let the Jews do their thing, no problem. And the blowing shofar later on Rosh Hashanah was to make sure that whoever the people were at those times, that they knew that it wasn't a call to arms. But look what we did now. We've kept the minhag. It's a pretty powerful reminder of our past. The fact that we don't do shofar earlier, even though we should, even though we have a halachic push to do so, which is reason makdim in the mitzvahs, but the history of what happened is so strong that we do not change that minhag. But really, as the Gemara closes here, it seems to be the case that it would have been ideal for Tkiyah Shofar to be by Shachris and not by Musaf. That would have been ideal. What? What other mitzvahs are you talking about? Just in general.
We read Mikra Megillah immediately after lightning.
Correct.
Brisson, you generally do earlier than later.
Generally, right? Yeah, what other things happen in davening?
Mitzvahs in general.
Yeah, we do it with Lulav and Esrog too, because Lulav and Esrog is by Hallel.
Beginning part of davening.
Right. It's by the Baal Shachris.
Reason Makdim seems the typical case by mitzvahs.
This is the anomaly.
This is the outlier.
This requires a little bit of research also. Like we normally have rules about when we hold a formal minhag. Like Yom Tov Sheni Shel Goliath is not really logically applicable. What?
Shema Yachzer Hadavar L'Kol Kula, meaning there was that Gzeira at that time. We kept it here figuring somebody else is going to come up with the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, but you need
Sad but true. It's called bills.
yeah, sad but true. Yeah. Okay. I hear that. I hear that. All right, we're at the next two dots. We're about 12 lines from the bottom of the page. Lamed Beis, Lamed Beis says the Gemara, B'shas Hillel, B'shas Halal, excuse me, Mechlal de Rosh Hashana Leika Halal. When our Mishnah says, and for when we say Halal, it implies that we don't say it here. So says the Gemara, my time, why don't we say Halal on Rosh Hashanah? And says the Gemara, a famous line. Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Malachi Ashar Slifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The angels upstairs in heaven said to Hashem, Ribono Shel Olam, Mipnei Ma Ein Yisrael Omrim Shiur Lefanecha B'Rosh Hashanah V'Yom Kippurim. Why don't we say on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Why don't we say Halal? Famous Gemara. So the Gemara says a rhetorical, sharp response of the Eibishter. Amar Lahem, Efshar Melech Yoshev Al Kisei Din. Could there be a case where the Dayan, the judge with a capital J, is sitting on the throne? Yoshev al Kisei Din, v'sifrei Chaim, v'sifrei Mesim psuchim lefanav, and all the books of life and the books of death are open before him. V'Yisrael omrim shira, and the Jews are sitting there like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about how great things are. No, it's a scary time. It's an intense time. And therefore, we do not say Hallel during those times. That brings us to the next Mishnah, which won't even be our last Mishnah. We have two more Mishnahs to go. We're going to go to the top of Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. Let's continue, says the Gemara. Shofar shel Rosh Hashanah, when it comes to the mitzvah of shofar, there are limitations in regards to getting to the finish line. Ein ma'avir nalevas atchum. You're not allowed to carry them through a tchum, or beyond the tchum, I should say. You're not allowed to move big rocks in order to get access to it. You can't climb a tree. You can't ride an animal. You can't go on a boat or swim, I guess. I didn't even mean that. And he's not even here. Is he here? No, he's not even here. I love you, Mark. Says the Gemara, you're not even allowed to cut the shofar, whether or not it is a rabbinic tool that would be cutting the shofar, or if it would be cutting it with a tool that would result in an Isser D'Oraisa, all are forbidden. You're allowed to put water or wine inside the shofar, which would probably help to clean it out a little bit and make the sound a little better. All is good. We don't stop children on Rosh Hashanah from being tokeah, even though they're not chayiv, because they're children. Not only do we not stop them, but we're allowed to coax them along and say, good, sweetheart, good Z's, keep trying. Now let's go to a chua. Now let's try it together. You can help them. But a person who's blowing shofar without even knowing what's going on, and like the example given by some of the Meforshim is that if you're like just holding it to get a comfortable grip and a sound comes out, that's not called tkiyah shofar. That's called misasek. You're not trying to fulfill any mitzvahs. You're just playing around. Okay, so you're not yotzei. That we learned already. And obviously, if you hear from someone who was misasek lo yotza, my time. Well, what's the reason why we don't allow for any of these actions to be done in order to lead to the mitzvah of shofar? Because says the Gemara, Lamdashe answer, 2 lines from the bottom, Lamed Beis and Beis, shofar aseh. There's a mitzvah aseh to hear the shofar, asehu. But when it comes to Yom Tov aseh velosa aseh. Ve'ein aseh, the aseh of shofar will not be doche as halosa aseh ve'aseh. The scales are uneven. And when we're dealing with the mitzvah of shofar, it's singularly a mitzvah aseh. If a person skips, for example, the mitzvah of shofar, God forbid, something that probably most of us have never done in our lives, unless we're Baalei Tshuva. And even then, secular Jews often go to shul on Rosh Hashana. So, okay, but that's a positive commandment, but it's not a negative commandment in its omission. Masha'en came when it comes to Yom Tov. The reason why the scales aren't even is because while it's true that there's an aseh component of Yom Tov, but there's also a los aseh component, and therefore you are not allowed to trump one for the other. Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, Lo olim be'ilan v'lo rochon al gabe behema. Can't climb a tree, you can't ride animals. Hashta de rabbanan amris lo. All right, you've told me already that that which is rabbinic cannot be done. De oraisa mi boya. Why did you have to tell me? Oh, by the way, you can't use like a spinning blade, like a reciprocating saw. Of course you can't use that. You're not even allowed to sit on an animal. Why did you then have to go later in the Mishnah to tell me? By the way, you also can't do an Isser D'Oraisa. Obviously, that's true. So says the Gemara, it's absolutely correct, the information you're saying, and the Gemara is just presenting a frame of an answer, which is Zov ein tzarich lomar zov tani, this and of course that. It's just it's not meant So it'd be a question, it's just a style of writing. And as we turn to the top of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, a short Amud, Baruch Hashem, a nice contrast from Lamed Beis Amud Beis, Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, says the Gemara on the top, we said the one is not allowed to cut a shofar either rabbinically or biblically. Mishum Shvus, that's a magla, that's a sickle. A sickle is not the right tool to cut a shofar with. The sickle is meant for harvesting. So if you use the wrong tool to cut this, then it will not be an Isser Doraisa. So that's why the post can distinguish, for example, between cutting your nails on Shabbos with nail clippers versus biting them with your teeth. Those are distinctions in regards to the normal way to do things. It's not normal with a migla, so therefore it's a shvus, it's an Isser Derabanan. The lo saseh, what would have been the example of cutting a shofar in a lo saseh form, says the Gemara Sakina, that would have been with a regular knife. And the Gemara here asks the same thing. If you're saying that you can't even use a sickle, lo saseh mibaya, why are you telling me I can't cut it with a knife? And the Gemara responds that the format is just, again, it's the stylistics of the Mishnah. Zo ve'ein tzarich lomar zok, this is usher, and all the more so that is usher. Next 2 dots, 6 lines down. Avalim ratza litain lesocho mayim o yain yitain. And then the Gemara makes a diuk that I would never have wanted to make. Mayim o yain in, that's allowed, but mei raglayim lo, you're not allowed to use urine. The whole goal here was to be able to clean out the inside of the shofar, and there is some type of off pH of urine, and in some cases wine, and hopefully not water, but it was still used to clean it out. But they said mei raglayim is not allowed, and this has to be Masnisan Mani, who must be the author of our Mishnah. Then the Gemara says 7-8 lines down on Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, it must be Abba Sholhi. What does Abba Shol hold? The Brisa writes about Abba Shol, the Tanya. Abba Shol Omer, Mayim o yain muter kedei letzachzecha. You can pour wine and you can pour water inside a shofar in order to clean it out a little bit. But mei raglayim asim mibnei hakavod. But you're not allowed to use urine in order to clean it out mibnei hakavod, because it's not the right way to treat a mitzvah. Even if it's effective in making the shofar sound better, it's not a good idea. And even if one were to do that, please rinse it off before you use it, because it's not kavadik. It's not nice. It's not the right way to do things. Oh, so says the Gemara, the 2 dots. First of the long lines, we said that we don't stop children from playing with a shofar, from blowing shofar on Rosh Hashana. But when it comes to women, we do stop them. Hold on one second, really. Tanya, the Brisa writes, the Brisa writes explicitly, not like the inference of our Mishnah. The inference of our Mishnah implied that women, we do stop them from being tokeh b'shofar. However, the Brisa says that they are absolutely included. They're not, no problem at all. Amar Abaye lo kasha, the Gemara says that that's not a conflict in Mari Makomos, because they're authored by different people. Rabbi Yehuda. One of the sources that we just saw is like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, and the other is like the pair, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya, the Brisa writes in regards to the requirement of doing smicha. Smicha is a requirement where a person takes their hands and they put all of the weight on the animal that they are about to do a korban on, and the pasuk says, Daber al bnei Yisrael somchen, vein benos Yisrael somcha si Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that when it came to smicha, only men were obligated to press the weight down on the animal prior to the korban, but women were not supposed to do so. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim, nashim somchos rishus. They're allowed to. It's not that they shouldn't, it's that they can, they don't have to. So this relates back to the very large discussion, certainly between Ashkenazim and Sfardim, about whether or not a woman can do a mitzvah saseh shesman grama. Ashkenazim are more lenient, that not only can a woman do so, she is not only can she can even make a bracha b'shem u'malchus asher kiddushan b'mitzvah savet tzivanu, al natilas lulav, and many other mitzvahs. There are some big discussions about tefillin, about a woman being in nidas. There are some side limitations, but fundamentally, that's how we paskin as Ashkenazim, and Sfardim don't allow for that. Says the Gemara, the 2.6 lines from the bottom, Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, he's asking Bahem Ad Sheyilmadu. We said that one can work with children until they learn it, and then the Gemara has an absolutely wild comment. Amar Rabbi Elazar, afilu b'Shabbos. Afilu b'Shabbos. Why would you let the kids play with a shofar on Shabbos? It's mamish muktzah. There's no reason why it should be mutter at all. So some of the Rishonim here point out that what must we be talking about? There's only one case that makes this all fit well, and that is what we learned in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We learned a couple of days ago that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that after the Churban, when Shabbos fell out on Rosh Hashana, if you were in Bezdin or possibly Bifnei Bezdin, in front of or on location, then you can blow shofar. That must be pshat in this Gemara. That's what the Baal HaMa'or writes here in the back of the Gemara, that is what must be going on here, because otherwise there's no reason why we would ever assume it's mutter to be tokeh b'Shabbos. Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa writes as well that on Shabbos it's mutter, again with the context of the Baal HaMa'or, that we must be talking about a case where it's in Bezdin around the time of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's asking Bohen Ad Yilmadu Afilu b'Shabbos. Shabbos. You can help the kids to learn how to blow shofar even on Shabbos. Not only is it true on Shabbos, but all the more so it's true on Yom Tov, because on Yom Tov there's not even an Isser Bichlal, there's no Isser Muksa. Even when it isn't going to be Shabbos, not even, especially when it's not going to be Shabbos, all the more so it's mutter. Okay, so says the Gemara as follows: Hagufa kasha. This did I skip a line? Nope. Hagufa kasha. This is a problem. We have two parts of what we just learned that conflict with one another. Amris, you said misaskin behen ad shil meduba filu b'Shabbos, that you are allowed to help children learn even on Shabbos. Alma, that implies lechatchila amrinan tiku, that you can tell the kids lechatchila to blow shofar. V'hadar tana. Then we later said ein me'akvin. We don't stop them. Ikuvuhu de lo me'akvin. Okay, we don't stop them, but halechatchila lo amrinan tiku. We don't tell them to blow shofar. So that has the subtlety. It says the implications are not aligned. Says the Gemara, Lokasha, as we turn to the top of Lamed Gimel, Lamed Beis, Kan, Bekatan Shegi L'Chinuch, Kan, Bekatan Shlegi L'Chinuch. It depends how old you are. Which one would you have thought is which? Who's the lenient one? So Rashi tells us, Katan Shegi L'Chinuch Misaskin Bem Sheyilamdu V'chol Shekein She'en Me'akvin. We teach them L'Chatchila, but when it comes to children who are younger, we don't stop them, but we're not allowed to teach them L'Chatchila. Okay, fine. Next Gemara, that we said that if a person is just dabbling, they're just trying to practice the grip, got to get your lips just right. Fine. So they're putting it up against their lips, and then all of a sudden the sound comes out. That's misasek lo yatsa. So the Gemara makes a deal that if a person is using a shofar and they're doing so for the sake of a song, they are capable enough. A YouTube video is going around a couple of weeks ago about a person who was doing the entire hatikva on a shofar. He was able to extend the key up and down. That's why I made it. There was family chat. Yeah, well, maybe it went around the family chat. The real talent. It's not a simple thing. It's like okay, it's just a talent. Anyways, that's tokei l'shir. Let's say he did that. That would be wearing your ashkafa on your sleeve. If you blow shofar to the tune of hatikva on Rosh Hashana, that's already a whole different level. So it says. So says the Gemara that it implies that it's going to be yotze, because we said misasek is not yotze. That implies tokei l'shir is yotze. Maybe Lema, says the Gemara, Misayle l'Rava, Dama Rava tokei l'shir yotze. Maybe our Mishnah, the inference of our Mishnah, supports the sheet of Rava. Says the Gemara, no, Dilma tokei l'shir nami misasek karile. We don't have a clear parameter in the Gemara of what misasek means, a super passive form of blowing shofar, and maybe tokei l'shir is in the same category. So there's not necessarily a raya from our Gemara. We don't even know if the diuk is right to say that tokei l'shir is yotze. At the 2 dots, 5 lines down, Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, the Gemara says, Dilma tokei l'shir nami misasek karile. Oh, sorry, at the 2 dots, V'ashomeh min misasek lo yotza. Of course, one who listens to one who is misasek, he's not yotze. Aval, says the Gemara, Hashomeh min hamashmiya le'atzmo. My. Let's say that I'm listening to someone who's blowing shofar specifically for himself. He's in his own room, and he's going to be yotze. He's doing it l'shem mitzvah. He wants to be yotze. Fine. So maybe what's the halacha? The halacha is, says the Gemara 6 lines down, that he's yotza. Lema, maybe we should say that this is a rejection of the sheet of Reb Zera. Maybe lema to have it to you to Reb Zera. Why? The Amar le Reb Zera l'shame. Reb Zera said to his servant, Ichvan v'takali. I want you to have kavana when you blow shofar, and then be tokeah for me. So that's a contradiction, because if you're saying that the person who's listening doesn't have to tell the guy who's blowing shofar that he's listening, and he's blowing for himself, but he's just in his own room. And if I can still be yotze, then why did Reb Zera tell his servant that ichvan v'taka, that you should have in mind? He doesn't need to do that. So says the Gemara, not necessarily a conflict against Reb Zera. Says the Gemara, as we get to the last Mishnah of the day, Dilma Aidi de Tana Resha Misasek Tana Seifa Nami Misasek. That really the language of Misasek was more used for poetic similarities of beginning and end of Mishnah, but not for any diukim to be made. That brings us to the last Mishnah of today, which will bring us to a significant way down, about a quarter of the way down on Lamed Dal and Lamed Aleph. This is David Merzel's Mishnah, because he's the Makri. Seder Tkiyos Shalosh al Shalosh Shalosh. We do 3 sets of 3s. That brings us to 9. So that's the minimum midoraisa. Shiur Tkiya. How long is a Tkiya? The answer is whatever David Merzel says. And sometimes the rabbi has to go back a little bit, and sometimes he puts up his hand and the rabbi keeps going. Both of those things happen. So Shiur Tkiya, how much is it? Kishalosh Truos. It's like doing 3 truos, but how long is a trua? Well, let's get to that in the Gemara. Shiur Trua is Kishalosh Yuvavos. Okay. We don't know what these terminologies mean. It's very hard to learn psak from these Gemaras. That's why we need Rishonim and Achronim and Shulchan Aruch and Nosei Kelim and Poskim. Still not simple to figure all of this out. We learned this Gemara out of context a while ago, this Mishnah, I should say. Taka Barishona, you did the first Tkiya, Umashach B'shniya Kishtayim. And when you get to the 2 Tkiyas that are in a row, you have Tkiya, Trua, tkiya, and then the next tkiya of the next set. So those two tkiyas did in a row. If you're taka b'rishona mashach b'shniya kishtaim, if you were tokeya for that double tkiya, that doesn't work. It only counts as one. Next, a person who says musaf, he's birech, he says shmona esrei of musaf, and only afterwards does he get a shofar. Tokeya umiriya v'tokeya shalosh pamim, he does the minimum of 9. Kishem sheshleach tzibur chayev, and just like the shleach tzibur, the Baal Tokeya is going to be chayev in shofar. Kach kol yachid v'yachid chayev. Strange line in the Gemara. Whoever would have thought anything else, Psukim and Chumash, why would we have ever thought we'll have to deal with that in the Gemara and not today? And this should also be very obvious that a shleach tzibur can be motzi other people. Why wouldn't he be able to be motzi other people? We're halfway down. Let's start the Gemara. The Brisa writes, shiur tkiya ketrua. No, our Mishnah had said that a shiur tkiya is shalosh truos, and here the Gemara says it's shiur tkiya ketrua. It's only one trua. So it says the Gemara, there's really no machlokes here. Amar Abai Tana Didan Kachashiv Tkiya de Kulhu Bave Utruos de Kulhu Bave. He's looking at all of the tkiyas relative to all of the truos, and the ratio is still a 3-to-1 ratio of truos relative to a tkiya. And Tana Bra Kachashiv Chad Baba V'Sudo. He's only looking at one bracket. Basically, the point is that there's just two ways to say the same thing. We're talking about trua in general, or we're talking about 3 specific truos. But either way, the amount of time seems to be the same. However, says the Gemara, we said in our Mishnah, shiur trua gimel yavavos. We said that a shiur trua is 3 yavavos. But Tanya, that's not true. It's not 3 yavavos. Shiur trua kishlosha shvarim, which is a longer amount of time. Amar Abaye, remember Abaye was the one who said before that there's no machlokas about the trua. So here about the tkiya. So here he says there is. Baha vaday pligi. Here there's for sure machlokas. The pasuk reads Yom trua yelochem. And how do we explain that pasuk? Matargaminon. The Targum at that time said Yom Yevava Yehei Lechon. That the word trua is translated as Yevava. However, when it said Be'ime de Sisra, when it was talking about the mother of Sisra, Be'ada Chalon Nishkefa V'atiyabev Aim Sisra, she was wailing. So Mar Savar Genuche Ganach, one said that the sound that she made, namely, how do we define Batiyabev, that she was wailing, as Genuche Ganach? We'll look at Rashi in a moment. To Mar Savar Yilule Yilile. Yilil, we don't know what that means. Take a look at Rashi. 5 lines from the bottom. Dibra Maschalman de Amar Shvarim Savar Genuche Ganach, Ke Adam HaGonech Milibo Keder Chacholim Shema'arichin it's a longer groan type of sound. It's a little longer. Mar Savar Yelule Yelil, and Rashi says K'adam haboche umekonin kolos ktsarim smuchim zelazeh, whimpering or some type of rapid form of crying, and that would be the difference. In Taka, there is a machlokas. Tana Rabbanan minayin shebe shofar. How do we know on Rosh Hashana that we need a shofar? Because Talmud Lomar, well, I really should say better. How do we know that we need to blow shofar the same way on Rosh Hashana that we do on Yom Kippur, which is 3 sets? So says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar v'avarta shofar trua. Ainli ela b'yovel. That pasuk only teaches me about Yovel. But Rosh Hashana minayin. How do I know that the same rules extend over to Rosh Hashana? Talmud Lomar b'chodesh hashvi. Because of the extra words in the pasuk of Chodesh Hashvi, the 7th month. But really, I don't need that because I know what month I'm in, because Yovel is always in, the shofar is always sounded in Tishrei. So it says the Gemara, Shein Talmud Lomar b'Chodesh Hashvi. I know what month I'm in. Why did the pasuk say b'Chodesh Hashvi? Ma Talmud Lomar b'Chodesh Hashvi. What do we learn from it? You call truos shel Chodesh Shvi zekazeh. All of the truos of that day, all of the shofar in the month of Tishrei are the same, whether it's Yovel or Yom Kippur, or if it's Rosh Hashana. Uminayin shepshuta lefanea. But how do we know that before each of the truas we have to have a pshuta, a regular tkiya, the tkiya that we call tkiya before the trua? So that says the Gemara. We learned it from a very similar place. Talmud Lomar v'avarta shofar trua. It's based on the pasuk. Uminayin shepshuta la'achareh, because that's what we do. Tkiya X tkiya. So how we already explained the one before, the pshuta lefanes from vavar to shofar trua. Uminai shepshuta lachareha, says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar ta'aviru shofar. So we see afterwards, after the shofar, there has to be another pshuta. I only know that that's true, that we do tkiya X tkiya, that formula. That's only true by Yovel. Rosh Hashana minayin. How do I know to extend this also to Rosh Hashana? Says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar, again, same pasuk as before, Talmud Lomar b'Chodesh Hashvi, Shein Talmud Lomar, top of Lamed Daled Manal, Shein Talmud Lomar b'Chodesh Hashvi. That pasuk is extra because I already know that I'm talking about the month of Tishrei, because Yovel was always started in the month of Tishrei on Yom Kippur. Why then did the Torah go out of its way to say the words b'Chodesh Hashvi, to teach us you call Shuas HaChodesh Hashvi Zekazeh? It's not just that we do sets of 3, but we also start with a tkiya and end with a tkiya. How do we know that we have to get to 9? Talmud Lomar v'avarta shofar trua shabbason Zikaron, Tirua, Yom Tirua Yelachem. So it's because of these two psukim. How do we know to interchange and to make sure that the numbers, that the 9 units are both true on Yom Kippur and they're true on Rosh Hashanah? Tamalomar shvi'i l'gzeira shava. So here the Gemara, it pivots a little bit, and now it's talking about gzeira shava. The past few answers we had said that it's a hekesh. We learned from Yom Kippur to the world of Rosh Hashanah based on a hekesh. So first of all, says the Gemara, Hakeitzad, what is the mitzias of how to be yotzei? Shalosh shehin teisha, 3 units of 3. Shiur tkiya ketrua, you have to make sure that tkiya is long enough. Shiur trua kishlosh shvarim, and the trua has to be the right length of 3 shvarim. And then the Gemara asks its question. Hi Tana meikara maisi lo behakesha. Initially, when we asked questions about comparing Yovel to Rosh Hashanah, we answered with a hekesh. The hashta maisi lo b'gzeira shava. All of a sudden, you magically came up with the gzeira shava of bashvi. So says the Gemara, hachi kamar. Ilav gzeira shava. You're right. Without a gzeira shava, hava maisina lo behakesha. I certainly would have answered with a hekesh. But then says the Gemara, hashta de'asya gzeira shava, because we just learned at this point in history was when we learned about this gzeira shava. So therefore, hekesha lo tarach. I don't need the hekesh anymore. So we'll stop right here about 12 lines down on Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. Tomorrow night is Thursday night. We're going to learn from right here about 10, 12 lines down. We are going to go until the last few lines on the Masechta. We'll stop right there. On Shabbos, right after davening, we'll do the siyum on the last few lines, and then we'll have a deluxe kiddush with rolls. Everyone is invited. It is not a sit-down kiddush. It is you can sit if you find a chair, but it's not like families and tables. It's just kind of everyone at their own risk. Watch out for the children. Wishing you all a beautiful night.